Imagine if the news could just root through all of your private chats. We actually had a small win with this before, and this is the case of New York Times v. OpenAI. It's actually a bunch more of them, and they just call themselves the news plaintiffs, against OpenAI and Microsoft as well. But we had a small victory when the judge finally said, okay, OpenAI doesn't have to preserve deleted chats. So if you delete a chat on OpenAI, they can still get rid of it. But still, even of the chats that are left, there might be chats that you want to keep around that still have a lot of personal information, that still have a lot of your private thoughts. And you may have posted those thinking that, well, ChatGPT is a corporation. Okay, maybe they'd violate my privacy for various things to target advertising or whatever, or use in future training. And maybe you didn't think that was such a big deal, but the news getting a hold of it? Well, that's a whole other thing, isn't it? Because if the news gets a hold of it, and all of those psycho reporters go rubbing their grubby little digits through it, looking for any little bit of salacious data that they can use against people, that's a big problem. And as I said before, it's a problem that's in our legal system, not just confined to AI. If they can do it against OpenAI, they can do it against anyone. Well, maybe not quite anyone, not like Signal because they're secure and they don't have it, but this is a problem. This is a huge problem for your privacy, even outside the issue of AI. The news plaintiffs succeeding here would mean that they can just go through your private information whenever they can convince a judge that the company that's holding that information has done something wrong. Because that's exactly what's happening here. You are not a party to this lawsuit, and yet they want your chats. If you've ever posted anything at all at ChatGPT, they want it. And we'll see how it is in this letter that is OpenAI trying to explain this to Judge Wong. And man, I'm hoping this one gets better because she has been way biased towards the news plaintiffs, the New York Times and all of them, which honestly I didn't really expect any better from the Southern District of New York, but still, I hope she gets better. I hope she starts seeing sense. Maybe this will, because they explain news plaintiffs continue to misrepresent the facts with contradictory and misleading assertions. OpenAI's request for reconsideration has nothing to do with evading production of evidence. This is what you'll hear online from people like Reed Southern and Ed Newton-Rex and people who seem to just only be posting on this one issue, one bit of propaganda after another. You see them, so many dozens of people, just all of a sudden they come out, see, they're destroying evidence. They're destroying evidence. No, they're not. They're preserving your privacy. To the contrary, news plaintiffs are the ones evading the process. You remember we covered that because it turned out they have all sorts of logs from when they were using ChatGPT for purposes of managing accounts and for doing journalism. Yeah, so this is another case of complete hypocrisy. Just like we saw out of Disney, just like we saw out of Warner, just like we saw out of Universal Music Group. The Times' demand for wholesale production would unnecessarily violate the privacy interests of millions of ChatGPT users worldwide. News plaintiffs have repeatedly mischaracterized the de-identification process, including by claiming it is anonymization and suggesting that it's sufficient to eliminate all privacy concerns. That is false. As OpenAI has now explained in 2 sworn witness declarations, the de-identification that has been proposed here is not designed to scrub information that is private, but not directly identifying, like confidential source code, proprietary trading strategies, medical details, or financial information. That is exactly the type of highly private information the Times cited when resisting production of its own logs. So you see, they don't want to give up their stuff. Even though they're a party to the case, you are not a party to the case. And yet they still want all your private medical details, financial information, and everything else. Ask yourself why. OpenAI has made this point at least 3 times. News plaintiffs have never responded to it, because they don't have a response. What response could you possibly have to that? News plaintiffs notably make no attempt to defend their request on relevance or proportionality grounds, nor could they. It would make no sense for news plaintiffs to argue the production of 20 million user logs belonging to third parties like you and me is appropriate under Rule 26, when they have so recently argued the production of only 82,000 user logs generated by a party to this lawsuit, the New York Times, is disproportionate and overly burdensome. Yeah, they don't want their secrets getting out. Secrets that are directly relevant to this case. Secrets that speak to everything. That says what they're really behind. That says what they're really trying to do here. They don't want that. And they're counting once again on the Southern District of New York where they have the fix in. News plaintiffs try to back away from their prior concession that at least 99.99% of the 20 million records are relevant to their claims. But the record is clear. In July, news plaintiffs and their expert insisted that the prevalence of outputs containing relevant information within the sample is likely between 0.001% and 0.006%. So there's basically almost none of that. That's a coincidence. I told you that was what they were doing. They were going to go and look through these and find ones that just coincidentally happen to be similar to their articles and go, aha, you see, that means they're copying. That means copyright. Rah, 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 rah. It follows then, by news plaintiffs' own admission, at least 99.996% to 99.999%, 5 nines, of ChatGPT conversations likely do not contain information relevant to their claims. I have never heard of a case where the 5 nines being against you is not completely statistically significant. That is nothing. That is literally zero. At least as close to zero as you can get in any sort of noisy data. News plaintiffs now claim that 14 to 24% of ChatGPT logs are relevant to their claims based on a paper finding that between 14 and 24% of conversations were classified into a category called seeking information. Wrong. The fact that someone used ChatGPT to seek information about a health condition, the number of the stars in the Milky Way, or how to poach an egg does not mean that that conversation log is relevant to news plaintiffs' claims. At best, this is yet another concession that the vast majority, up to 86% of the logs, are irrelevant. And it's also revealing, because if they're complaining about anyone seeking information, that means that they don't want you to get information from anyone but them. Yeah, you do the number of stars in the Milky Way. Oh, you must be wanting to get that from New York Times and not, I don't know, NASA? You want information about your health condition? Ooh, we want to see what that health condition is. We want to know about you. Give us your private health data. I swear, journalists are almost as bad as politicians. News plaintiffs claim that the protective order is sufficient to eliminate any privacy risk, but the existence of a protective order is not a reason to disclose a trove of irrelevant private information so that it can be pored over by plaintiffs' lawyers and consultants. No court would require Google to hand over millions of irrelevant Gmail messages even under a protective order. There is no reason why a different standard should apply to ChatGPT conversation logs. Except, of course, that they want to set a different precedent. Because if they do, you bet your bottom dollar they're going to turn around and try to get your Gmails. Or whatever other email system you go through. News plaintiffs now abandon their argument that Judge Van Coylen's orders in Concord, that's the other Anthropic case, we haven't really gone into that one, support wholesale reproduction without narrowing for relevance, i.e. the sole basis for the court's order. They do not dispute that Anthropic in Concord affirmatively offered to produce 5 million prompt output pairs without filtering for relevance, nor do they dispute that Judge Van Coylen never had occasion to rule on whether wholesale production, as opposed to narrowing for relevance, was appropriate under Rule 26. News plaintiffs suggest that this court has ruled on this question repeatedly, part of their table pounding. Again, wrong. The parties' briefing to date has focused primarily on the issue of preservation. This is a new issue that news plaintiffs first raised by motion on October 15. None of the court's prior orders addressed that issue or, for that matter, any issue related to conversation sampling. News plaintiffs demand that OpenAI produce the data on November 14. This is inappropriate and impossible, especially since the 14th was the date of this letter. De-identification is technically complicated, especially for 20 million records. Forcing production before the logs are fully de-identified will drastically exacerbate the privacy risk. Because that is exactly what they want. They want you to have no privacy. They want to have access to all of your chats, all of your emails, all of your everything. This is just the front part of the wedge. You gotta stop the camel's nose in the tent. Otherwise, it's going to be the entire camel. And when that happens, really hard to get the camel back out again. That's why you always have to stop it now. Even if it's something you don't like, even if you don't like AI, you still have to stop this because it won't stop there. And it'll be you paying the price years on down the line. Always keep that in mind. Thank you so very much for watching. Comments for the Comment God, shares for the Share Throne. Please hit like, subscribe, and the bell. And of course, donate.pagosity.tv to keep me doing what I do. Whether it's one-time donations or regular support to get these videos early and ad-free. Thank you so very much for watching. Until next time, stay strong and be free.